Hi class, so this is the second part of a pretty complex question. How did the British attempt to maintain firm control over the American colonies after the French Union War and the growing colonial resentment towards the British lead to the Revolutionary War? So this particular part is just going to look at what the colonies do, how they feel about these attempts by the British government to gain or almost regain control over them. So colonial resentment itself, really the most important question you have to ask yourself is what were the colonists so afraid of that they were willing to risk it all? And when I say risk it all, it does mean, signing their lives away when they sign that Declaration of Independence and when they do become Minutemen. What were they going to gain? So things that you should be thinking about when we go over this. I'm not going to tell you because that's part of the essay. So the French and Indian War. Many colonists are very reluctant to fight in the war. As we talked about in class, they risk losing their homes and their families when they were to leave. Their homes would not be protected. They also felt that maybe the British government was not really truly understanding all the sacrifices that they were being asked. And truthfully, many colonists didn't have any connection to what was going on out in the West. They weren't particularly moved by it. They didn't feel they had an obligation to help. Smuggling is going to continue with the French and the Spanish throughout the Caribbean. This is going to be a huge insult to the British, who were trying to actually starve some of these islands because it is war. And many of the American colonists are going to disregard that, and they are going to continue smuggling. Those that do fight found that they are often poorly treated by the British, even given second-class citizenship, so to speak. George Washington's rank was not going to be recognized at this point. I think he should have been a captain, and he's going to remain a colonel. And many of the men, and also the women, that were either there or helped, they are ridiculed for a lack of culture. They were considered kind of backwoodsmen-like, not particularly civilized. So there was insult upon injury on that. And because of that, and because of promises that were made and not kept, some colonists are going to refuse to obey the Proclamation of 1763. So a good first example of how that resentment is going to lead to action. All right, the boycotts. So you have the Sugar Act. This is the first time we start to hear no taxation without representation, and also the first time we start to see an all-out call for non-importation acts. We've already talked about a lot of these in class. I'm not going to go into a whole lot of detail here, but understand that there is a need for unification in order for these boycotts to work. And if you were found not supporting such boycotts, you might end up a little tarred and feathered or maybe roughed up a bit. Then you have the Stamp Act in 1765. It is the first direct tax on the colonies. The Sons of Liberty are going to begin, as well as the Daughters of Liberty. You're going to see much larger boycotts. So I'm so successful in that there is not a single stamp sold. And the Stamp Act Congress, which is going to send a list of grievances to the king, and that won't be the first time, as well as a statement of what they felt their British rights were and how they were being disregarded. Then you have the Townshend Acts, 1767. Again, more organized boycotts against not just what was on the list of the Townshend Acts, but pretty much everything else that they could think of in terms of the British goods. More colonists are also starting to publish their criticisms. Two important ones would be John Dickinson, The Letter from a Farmer in Pennsylvania, as well as Sam Adams is going to write the formal statement for Massachusetts about how they feel about just not the Townshend Acts, but in general, how Parliament and how the King is disregarding them as British citizens. Parliament is going to punish Massachusetts for that formal statement, and they will suspend the colonial legislature. And as we talked about in class, you know how important town hall meetings and the colonial legislature is going to be to all of New England. So this is particularly hurtful. Surprisingly, Virginia is going to support Massachusetts, and they are going to publicize that support, and they will be punished as well. The Virginia's governor is going to suspend the House of Burgesses, which is their legislative body. So you start to see resentment turn into writing, turning into action. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time. If you want to kind of look these over, it might be helpful to understand what exactly they are concerned about. These are just two quotes that I picked from a much longer document that was written by John Dickinson, but I think you will get the point about what they feel is being abused by Parliament. So far at this point, it's just been a lot of words, tar and feathering, a couple people getting roughed up. But of course, the Boston Massacre is going to change that. It takes place March 5th, 1770. And we talked about this in class, but overall you've got a lot of tension, not just in Boston, but in other areas, but Boston in particular here, over having to share elbow space, or elbow room, I should say, with the British troops. They often have to share jobs, maybe not necessarily the living space, but maybe next door. Troops might be living with you, and this doesn't come about out of nowhere. You've got this tension that is constantly boiling over, as well as troops are known to not be particularly nice to some of the colonists, so it's not just the colonists roughing up the troops, but it's also vice versa, and that tension is going to boil over. The words exchanged, snowballs are going to be thrown, and then of course those mysterious shots are fired. 5 colonists are killed out of that. People are going to be demanding justice. Sam Adams is going to begin what's called the Massachusetts Committee of Correspondence, so he can tell the other colonies what is happening in Boston. Pretty soon other colonies will also have their own committees. Now, we've talked about this in class. John Adams is going to defend some of the troops, and they will be found innocent, proving the fact that the colonies are not necessarily ripe at this time for rebellion. They are still trying to think very level-headed, but tensions are definitely there, and this does not really help them. So we talked a lot about this in class. You probably want to look this over again. This often comes up on AP exams in general. But what exactly is Paul Revere trying to do here? This is not a particularly accurate picture, and we talked about that. So this is a piece of propaganda, and this is going to add to the tension, add to the resentment, because if you live in South Carolina, you're going to probably take this as something that actually happened. All right, Boston Tea Party. Boston is the hotbed of action. The Township Acts are going to be repealed fairly quickly because they're just simply not making a whole lot of money on them. But they keep the tax on tea somewhat as punishment for the colonists, because pretty much everybody drinks tea. So that is going to stay until the Tea Act of 1773, which we talked about in the other presentation. But in essence, this is going to make the tea from the East India Company cheaper, thereby assuming Parliament has just made everybody happy that all the colonists are going to want to buy this tea. That's not particularly true. The colonists are going to see through this, or they believe that they're still being taken for granted. And so many of the wharf workers that work on the Boston docks are going to refuse to unload any boats that will be carrying tea. So those boats are in that harbor for a while. The Sons of Liberty are going to take it upon themselves to get rid of that tea, and they dump thousands of pounds of tea overboard. What's shocking here is that as much as there's been protests and boycotts and people being roughed up, you haven't really seen this outright disregard for law and order. In the Sons of Liberty, what they've just done is somewhat treasonous, as well as the fact that you've taken someone's private property and you've destroyed it. So you know that this is not going to be overlooked by Parliament. Parliament's going to punish Massachusetts and Boston in particular with the Coercive Acts and a new Quartering Act. They want to not only punish Massachusetts and of course Boston in particular, but they want to warn the other colonies that if we can do this in Massachusetts, we can do this to you, so everybody start towing the line, so to speak. The threat is going to backfire, and I think Parliament's going to be shocked, because the other colonies are going to come to the aid of Boston. They're going to send them food, they're going to send them supplies, and try to slip through the British the line that is trying to stop trade going into Boston. This will also lead us to the First Continental Congress, September 5th, 1774. 12 of the 13 colonies are going to show. They do two things, basically. They're going to send a petition to the king, again, stating what their rights are and how they feel that they have been violated. And they're going to order a ban on all British goods. So this is probably the biggest boycott you're going to see yet. And they know that they can be successful. They have been successful in the past. And when they have a successful boycott, the people back home in England are going to start to lose jobs, and there's going to be a lot of lost profit. So they know really hitting them in the pocketbook is probably their best angle they could take. You still have a lot of people not wanting revolution, so it's a little too soon to start calling for that, although there is that conversation taking place. Massachusetts will organize their own militia. They feel that they do have to defend themselves, especially since they are being targeted by Parliament. So that particular group is definitely looking for a fight, so to speak. If you were Parliament, that's how you would see it. This group will be called the Minutemen. At Lexington and Concord, April 1775. Right, the Minutemen have been told that the British regulars are coming to look for Sam Adams and also John Hancock, as well as take the weapons and ammunition that was being stored throughout these two towns. And so the Minutemen are called now to actually not just only protect Sam Adams and John Hancock, which they will be hidden away, but to really protect the weapons of the local farmers and what they feel is their right to own weapons, right, the right to bear arms. They gain confidence in not only defending their homes, which they felt they had the right to do, but also in defeating the regulars. But this bloodshed is going to lead to a lot more colonists starting to question, what are the regulars doing? Are they really protecting us, or are they out to get us? Because they don't necessarily feel they need protection from anybody, such as the French. That's a non-issue ever since the French and Indian War. And for any its Native Americans, that type of protection is needed out on the western frontier, not in towns like Boston. So this is really adding to a bit of that anxiety that the colonists are starting to experience. This will also lead to the Second Continental Congress taking place in May 1775. Three big things are accomplished here, but very early on, you've got George Washington. He will be chosen to lead the Continental Army, because what happens after Lexington and Concord, more colonies are starting to realize they have to come up with some way of having to protect themselves. They also send an olive branch petition to the king. This is the last attempt at trying to bridge that gap and hopefully come up with some peaceful terms and some peaceful coexistence. As they are already told by the end of 1775 that the olive branch petition is not going to be accepted, and that the king is basically seeing them as being rebellious, and he has also hired Hessians to basically, start to attack the colonists if need be. So the colonists are quite offended that their king is not even sending over British troops, that he is going to use hired men. So we're not going to talk a whole lot about common sense here, but when we talk about writings and building resentment, some things need to be stated in very plain words, and Thomas Paine was very good at doing that. A little long-winded, but still effective nonetheless. So this is just one quote. I know we've talked about this in class, but he makes it very clear, very common sense language. These are the reasons why we need to break away, because not everybody is on board with this revolution, and of course we've talked about that in class as well, but more people are going to be convinced by Thomas Paine than probably any other piece of paper that had been published at the time. So up until then, you have the Declaration of Independence. So that's, of course, July 1776. This is the ultimate form of resentment, I guess you could say, in that they have all agreed that we have to break away, and that we need foreign assistance, and that we don't need Britain anymore to be able to retain our rights. And of course, we've talked about this document and what those rights should be. So think about all these things that were taking place, a couple pictures here. And when you do write an essay, there's no expectation to write everything that I've gone over. You pick and choose the things that you feel comfortable with writing and how you use those facts in order to support your argument. So you still need a thesis, you still need an argument, and how are you going to use these facts in order to support those? Thanks very much.